Hello and welcome to the Game Changers podcast, where you'll hear from trailblazing women in sport. I'm Sue Anstiss, a founding trustee of the Women's Sport Trust charity and the founder of Fearless Women, a company with a powerful ambition to drive positive change for women's sport. I am incredibly grateful to Barclays for supporting this series of the Game Changers, which will focus on fearless women in football, reinforcing Barclays' huge commitment to the beautiful game. Last year, Barclays announced the biggest ever sponsorship of women's sport in the UK as the Barclays FA WSL became Europe's first fully professional women's football league. A huge amount of their investment also went into establishing the Girls Football School Partnerships, with the aim of ensuring that all girls in England will have equal access to play football in schools by 2024. My guest this week is Stacey Copeland, MBE. Stacey has represented her country at an international level in two sports, football and boxing. Following a successful football career, where she represented England, played in the FA Cup final and played overseas for 6 years in the US and Sweden, Stacey then went on to pursue her dreams of a career in boxing. During her 6-year amateur boxing career, Stacey became European silver medallist and 3-time national champion. She then turned professional and in 2018 became the first British woman to win the Commonwealth title. I started our conversation by asking Stacey about her earliest memories of playing football.
So my very first memories of playing football were at school, in the playground, at any time that I could. and to be honest, I didn't realise, there wasn't really a girl or boy thing to me then. You just, all your friends, I was the only girl as it happens, but it really didn't occur to me that much. I just loved playing football. So that was my first memories of being involved. My first memory of actually playing football was on the school team. We had this awful green kit, this really horrible green kit with a very thick white collar, but we just loved it. And I had my first pair of football boots, and I remember putting my little shin pads on, and just the whole thing's really vivid. And just getting on the pitch for the whistle blowing for that first game was just amazing. Sadly, what actually happened is a parent and coach on the other team obviously realised there was a girl and, shouted across the pitch and insisted that I'd be made to leave. And that was the first time I realised I was a girl and that it was a thing, like as in a problem.
How old were you then?
I was 7 or 8.
What was it about the sport that you loved, do you think, that made you want to play football rather than other sports?
I really don't know, because there's not really any people in my family. I mean, boxing, there's an obvious connection, but not with football. So I honestly do not know. And I did have girls who were friends, but they were doing like hopscotch, which lacked appeal for me. They were doing a thing with elastic bands, even less so, and having weddings, which I definitely wasn't interested in. So I don't know. I really do not know what it was. I just loved everything about it. I loved watching it, playing it, being with my friends, just the whole thing, everything it entailed, really.
And how did boxing become a part of your life?
My dad was a boxer and my granddad was a boxer and was running our gym, by the time I came along. So it was very much part of my family. And me and my dad, when I'd visit him on the weekends, would always be watching Rocky, which I thought was real, thought was a true story, as you do when you're a kid. So I was a big Rocky fan. I thought he was a real boxer. And yeah, it just started with that, really, like me and my dad watching the old fighters like Muhammad Ali and Sugar Ray and messing around in the front room, sort of getting the gloves on, messing about and stuff. So that's really how it started. And then they took me to the gym, which I just absolutely loved from the first time I went in, from everything from the environment, the atmosphere, the hard work everyone put in, the characters that fill the gym. Just loved it.
My dad was a boxer. I never had the draw to box, or wouldn't even have contemplated it. So it is interesting that it felt so natural to you at that young age.
Absolutely. And back then, boxing wasn't really a thing for fitness. You either went to the gym to be a boxer or you didn't go in the gym. I knew if I was going in there, I was going to compete, and that's what I assumed would happen. And then it didn't quite work out like that for a long time.
No. It does feel like you fell in love with two sports where you couldn't really compete as a girl. So how did that make you feel at the time as a young woman?
I think that first instance of being made to leave the pitch in football had more of a confusing impact because I was so young. I couldn't articulate how it felt being made to leave the pitch. Obviously, looking back, I know I felt humiliated and ashamed, really. But I didn't know what those words meant at that age. I just felt bad, and I felt like there was something wrong with me. So, of course, I went home and asked my mum to cut my hair short so that I could pretend to be a boy and play on the team. And I didn't think much of it until other kids started to say, why do you want to be a boy? And I never wanted to be a boy. I just wanted to play football at the time. That was the only way. So that started to become an issue. Then in boxing, I got to the age of 11, when you can usually start boxing. There was a small group of us that did everything together. Obviously, they were lads, because I was the only girl in the gym. We'd done this golden gloves thing, which is where, you demonstrate the basics of boxing and you get a certificate, little medal. And I did the whole course, but then wasn't allowed to go for the medal and the certificate. And I was like, why? And they said, girls can't do it. It was weird to me because none of my family kind of put restrictions on me. I didn't put any on myself. And I was a bit like, so what's going on here? And that, it started to enter my consciousness. And then when I got into secondary school and I was doing the boxing and the football, that's when other name calling came in, like shim, she-male, boy. And it was as if people thought if I wanted to do so-called boy sports, I must therefore want to be a boy. And I didn't. It took me a while to be conscious of it. And then when I really internalised it and I felt like there was something wrong with me. And that lasted, I have to say, for a very, very long time.
And was that boys and girls?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was equally difficult for people to understand where to quite place me. Like what? Yeah. And teachers seem to find it quite difficult. If ever I misbehaved, which I did, I was a very, very hyperactive, energetic kid. So I got in trouble a lot. And quite frequently they would question my sexuality. So interestingly, other kids didn't. They assumed I must want to be a boy. But with teachers, they'd say, confusion about your sexuality and maybe this is what's causing these. And I'd be like, well, I don't know what you're talking about. So it was interesting how I couldn't just be a girl who liked those sports.
Yeah,
I must be something else, which is the default setting, isn't it, of course?
Yeah, and so I'm going to come on to talk about that in a moment, if I can. And I guess you're clearly such an amazing athlete. So did it not come to a point where you thought, I could play netball or hockey or athletics or other sports? Were you ever tempted by those?
I did other sports at school, obviously, as part of the PE curriculum, but nothing gripped me like football and boxing did. I guess sometimes it's like the people you love. Who knows why sometimes you ask yourself, why do I love them? But I just loved both of those sports.
And when did you realise you were a really talented footballer?
Turning point was when I was around about 14, 15. My first girls' team was Stockport County, because by then by 93, the FA had got involved in this football. And this is why I think it's great to have mixed sports, but sometimes for girls it can be so valuable to have that session with other girls, because I remember turning up to that first training session and thinking, wow, there's not just me. Because here was all these little girls just like me talking about the latest Predator football boots and shin pads and this player and that player, and they all had the little kits on, and I was like, oh my God, here's my tribe. It was a wonderful feeling to see other girls like me. And so I stayed with Stockport County till I went to the first team at like 14 years old, and I got Player of the Year in my first year in senior football. And my coach wrote a letter to school because he knew I was having like loads of difficulties at school, because it made me angry all the time and I just got picked on constantly. He wrote a letter saying, what talent I've got and what I've brought to the team and what a great team player I'd been, and this, that and the other, and that he wouldn't be surprised if I'd get an England call up within the next few years. And they read it out in assembly. There was like a hush over everyone of like, oh, she's actually good at football, like regardless of... I was thinking the same thing at the same time. I was like, this isn't just a thing that makes me a freak. It's actually, I could actually do something here.
How great that he did that. That's fantastic that he did that, isn't it?
Yeah. I just went back to visit kids at his school. He works in a school now, and I went back a couple of years ago, which was lovely. And that really started some cogs turning in my head of, right, this could actually be something. And then a scout from the US came to one of our games and spoke to my coach after the game and said, we really want to keep an eye on her. These things being said by other people then started to make me think, wow, I could actually have some opportunities and some real possibilities in sport.
When did you get your first England call up? How old were you then?
So the first one was for the England under-18s, which Hope Powell oversaw all of the teams at the time. They didn't have separate coaches. And I went to Moss Farm for trials, and it just went great for me. I got 2 assists and I scored 3 goals across the games. And then a few weeks later, we got our letters, and I was the only one out of the 6 that didn't get picked. And how old was I? I was like 16. I mean, to say I was devastated is quite an understatement. My coach rang up for feedback and said, I was there. She just played great. What's going on? And they said, she came out of position too much. She wasn't disciplined enough in staying in a position. I was just absolutely heartbroken. And all it did really was make me more determined. And so after that, I read loads of stuff on staying in position and what position I should be in and tucking in and doing this and doing that, and then really up to my training. And I thought, right, I need to be in the Premier League. And that's when I made the decision to move. So ultimately it was a good thing. And then the actual call up came when I was 17, and then I went off to the European Championships, which, I mean, what a phenomenal team we had. I mean, many of the names that are well known now, Casey Stoney was in that team, Rachel Unit, Farrah Williams, Amanda Barr, exceptional players and people.
It's interesting, isn't it? I spoke to Casey on the podcast, and her story is quite similar in terms of not getting selected, that then drove her to have the most extraordinary fitness to, show everybody what she could do. So a similar pathway really there, and a great message for young people to know, if at first you don't get that selection, to work hard.
And this is something that I've had to learn over a long career of sport, certain lessons it teaches you. And one of them is to really try and not have all of your self-worth wrapped up in your sport. And it's a tough lesson to learn, and you kind of have to keep going back to it. But if not, then times like that, when you don't get selected, it can feel like you have failed and you are a failure. And my whole world felt like it had ended. And it's happened again and again. And I've had to keep going back to that thing, right? This is something I do, something I love. It's not everything that I am. I'm not a failure if something doesn't work out in sport. And it's a good lesson to learn early on, but it's tough because you don't have the psychology to figure it out. And I think if you learn more about sports psychology, that's really helpful. And I wish I'd have known a bit more about sports psychology when I first went to England, because I think it had really, now looking back, I can see loads of the self-talk wasn't helpful. Loads of the negative thoughts that I let in weren't helpful, but I didn't know that at the time. I was 17.
And in terms of people's perception of the women's game at the time, tell us about the reaction of your workplace when you went in, when you got that call up.
Yeah, so I worked in a factory type warehouse thing at the time. And when I got that first letter, I mean, that was, wow. When I got that letter and it has the 3 lines on it, and I guess you get an email now, but back then you used to get a letter and it said, we're delighted to tell you. And that's all I read. And then I was bouncing up and down, and I thought I better read the rest of it. And I read it and I kept reading it over and over again to make sure it was right. So I took this into my boss because I needed the week off to play at the European Championships. And there were no holidays left on the rota, so I went to see him. And I said, right, I need a week off, but there's no available. He said, what for? So I kind of passed him this letter, and I'm stood there, probably floating really, bursting with excitement. It takes a minute and he doesn't really say anything. And then he says, so you want me to give you a week off to play for a women's football team? In exactly that tone. So I said, well, it is the England women's football team. And he went, laughed, made all these jokes, these innuendos, And I just kind of stood there and I said, look, it really means a lot to me. Can I just take it unpaid? To which he agreed. And I walked out of the office feeling really small, really silly, to be honest, for thinking it was such a big deal to play for the England women's football team, not the England football team. And I didn't tell any of my colleagues, I didn't tell anyone else. And it actually impacted me when I stood there for the anthem. I remember thinking, but it's not the proper England football team. It's nobody thinks it's the same. It's not, and I shouldn't have let that happen. But then again, I was influenced by things that other people say. And now, when I look back on that, I know we can't change every person like that sat behind that desk of, which are men and women in some cases. But I see my job as trying to make sure that any particularly young person who comes out of an interaction like that they don't leave that interaction feeling small like I did, and that they can still feel proud of who they are despite the attitudes of others. But I didn't know that at the time, and it very much impacted me.
And when we see those amazing celebrations as the Lionesses found out they were playing, there's a lot of that. So that's a really reassuring thing, isn't it? How that's changed across that decade or what have you, in terms of the call up and people realising it is as valid as the men's team.
Absolutely.
Too, so
and I have to say, the last couple of World Cups, I've felt very emotional watching them. I remember, the one in Canada, I remember sitting in my friend's front room. No, it was with my family. I think it was at my mum's house, watching the game in the front room. And there was a moment towards the end when the commentators were talking, and Sue Smith was part of it, who I played with at Tranmere, who was my roommate, who's just a phenomenal player and a wonderful human being.
And a great commentator.
She is. She's excellent. Yeah. And I was thinking, wow, and she was talking about a little bit about what it was like before and what it's like now. And I just thought back to when we were playing back then. And I don't know, it just was like a rush all at once of those memories of, being with Sue Smith in those teams and everything we tried to do and, people mocking us and now looking at where they were and the last World Cup was the same, thinking of that situation with my manager and now all these massive corporations falling over themselves to support the team. And it does make me very, very emotional because I think, wow, this is all of our journeys. And, the girls on the pitch at that one time, it's their moment, of course, but it's all of us a part of that because we all believed it was possible.
I was just going to move on to when you obviously had a great time playing in the UK and at Doncaster Belles, such a trailblazing team in England, and then you headed out to the US, so a bit later perhaps, and you didn't go when you were initially scouted, but at 22 you went out there. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I loved being at Donny Belles. I absolutely loved every second wearing that shirt with great pride and being part of the team. And to be honest, it was a change in my personal life because we had, just a year before that, had a family tragedy which resulted in a 9-month court trial. The whole thing was just horrendous. And I ended up not being able to live in my house where I lived with my boyfriend at the time. I was staying in my car. Looking back, I mean, I don't know, I did it. So, sometimes I'd drive to Doncaster, sleep overnight in my car, get up and get on a bus to Arsenal. And that's just what I did at the time. And after the trial, it was just such a devastating time. I knew I needed a brand new start in my life. So I thought, right, sport is, the gift that I've been given and let's see if I can use it. So I started contacting some of the schools over there and I thought I'd be too old. But as it turns out, I was for Division 1, but not for Division 2. And I started getting these offers and I thought, right, let's go. And I remember that morning I had £200 in my pocket and one suitcase full of football stuff. And I thought, what am I doing? What am I doing? And honestly, the fear, I was absolutely petrified. I was just thinking, I didn't know anybody. I didn't know what I was going into. I had nothing to come back to if it didn't work out. And I thought, what am I doing? And, my dad got to the door and I was like, Dad, what am I doing? What am I doing? And he was like, it's going to be fine, get in the car. And obviously we went and me and him had a massively emotional goodbye at the airport. It was awful. And off I went. And it was a life-changing, phenomenal experience for me. Not just as a player who then developed into a leader, but as a human being.
And where did you go and what did you study?
I started off in South Carolina and then transferred to a team in Austin, in Texas, which is a fantastic city and much more what I'm used to than South Carolina. Was a big cultural shift for me. Yeah. And I moved there and their university had been founded by Holy Cross fathers. And I'm not religious at all, but I really bought into that servitude for others because I was big on that anyway, sort of having a positive impact and using sport for good. So I loved it. I loved the atmosphere and the environment. And so I ended up being over there for 5 years and I studied sociology. Fantastic. Turns out I quite like education.
Yeah, a bit comes to later though. Yeah, absolutely. And how was women's football viewed at the time when you were there? It's very differently to what you'd experienced in England?
Yeah, because I actually saw less of an issue with it. I think because it's not their national sport, like, ice hockey, baseball, basketball and American football, it's viewed upon differently for men. That's the key thing. So quite often the question is, how is it viewed differently for women? I think it's because it's viewed differently for men that makes it different for women, if that makes sense. And so I found it quite equal. And of course, the big impact was Title IX. And when I learned about that, which was obviously that happened in 1972, all those men and women that fought for the right for women's sport to have equal funding in institutions in America. I mean, that had a massive impact on me, because I thought, wow, all of those men and women who fought for the right for me to benefit from this opportunity now, I don't know them, they don't know me, but they fought for that, and I've got that opportunity, and that wasn't lost on me. And I thought, I need to make the most of this opportunity for what they did. And I also need to make sure I'm doing as much as I can for the next generation, just like those who've done before me, because without the likes of Jane Couch and her solicitors, I wouldn't be able to box. Without Title IX, I wouldn't have been able to go to America and play football. And I think there's all these people that have made these things possible for us. I've just felt compelled to try and do my bit for the next generation in the same way.
That's hugely powerful, isn't it? And of you to realise and appreciate what's gone before. So fantastic, really. You had another nasty injury in your senior year there. So how did that affect you perhaps more than other injuries in the past?
Massively. So collectively, I've had 12 broken bones and 8 surgeries.
Oh, bloody hell.
Yeah, mostly due to sport, but one due to a ball pool that I shouldn't have jumped in. And one falling down the stairs because I was trying to do the crane out of Karate Kid on the top banister when I was 10. So not recommended. But mostly the rest of them have been through sport. But that last one, you're quite right, was very, very different. I think for a few reasons. It was my senior year, which is prestigious over there. It's a big thing to get to your senior year. We had a fantastic team, atmosphere, team chemistry. I was at my happiest that I'd ever been in my life. And the transition from what I'd just been through when I got to America and where I was as a human being to then thriving in life, and, was a huge step. So everything felt great. We'd had a brilliant first 4 games in the season, and then came this tackle and broke my fibia, so the bone on the outside of my shin, which I knew it was painful at the time, but I didn't know it was broken. So I kept running about on it for the next few days, feeling really rather sick with agony. And then we had the scan and I was like, oh, right, that's why, because it's broken. So I wore a boot for the whole season. And then I got back for the last 4 games somehow. And I scored the penalty that put us through to the Sweet 16 national championships. And off we went to California. Again, just an absolute dream, fairy tale coming true for a working class kid from Manchester to be flying to California to play in a US championship. It was incredible. And at the end of the game, I hit the post with about, it was 34 seconds left on the clock or something like that. And then we went to penalties. And my penalty got saved. And then they scored theirs, which put them straight through. And I felt, bizarrely, really betrayed by the sport that I'd loved and given everything to all my life. And I never, ever felt the same again. It was like I'd been madly in love in a marriage and then walked in and it had cheated on me. Do you know what I mean? Really bizarre, but that is exactly how it felt. And I felt completely cheated and betrayed by the thing that I loved most in my life. And I couldn't believe football had done that to me. It just felt too unfair to frame in any other perspective. And I didn't, to be honest, get over it. I still played. I finished my spring season in America and I still went to Sweden to play because I'd already committed to that. And my best friend from America was going with me. So we went together and, still had a brilliant experience, still loved playing, but it was not the same at all. And I think I'd have carried on playing football if I didn't have any other options. But boxing had always been something I really wanted to do. And honestly, within days, I started thinking the only way I can go forward is to know that there's something else after and it can't be football. I just felt different forever.
Did you consider staying in the US and boxing in the US?
There was 2 key things for me. One, if I was going to box, I wanted to come home and box. And really, I wanted my dad to be my coach. And the second thing is my first niece had just been born. And I just felt that I'd never known a love like that ever. And I wanted to be here to be part of her life. Those are the 2 big reasons I came home, which I'm glad I did.
And how did your family react to your decision to come back into box again?
Well, I came back for a very short time and then went over to Sweden and then finished my playing career there. And then I went travelling around Europe a little bit just for a couple of weeks with my American friend. And then she went back and then I met up with my dad in Café Rouge on Deansgate in Manchester, and we had these in-depth chats that we always have. And he said, what an amazing experience and this, that and the other. And so, I guess you'll be getting ready to settle down now. And I said, settle down? What are you talking about? And he said, well, so I said, no, Dad, no. And he said, well, what's your plan then? I said, I'm going to box. And he went, what? And I said, I'm going to box. I said, a couple of years ago when I was home for the summer from America, I went to watch in Manchester, the women's national finals. It was like the quarterfinals, whatever. And I loved it. And I think I can be as good as them. I think I can do it. I'm not too old yet. I need to do it now, but I can do it. I've never lost that hunger and desire. And now I've got the chance to go for it and finally be a boxer. And he just didn't say much at all. And then he rang me a couple of days later and said, right, I've been having to think about it. And if you want to box, then all right. And I said, Dad, that wasn't, I wasn't asking. I was telling you, that's what I'm going to do. Daughters like me kind of, they tell the dads what's happening. He was like, right, okay, well, I want to be a coach if that's all right. And I want to try and make you the best you can be. And let's go on the journey together. And we did. And what a fabulous, fabulous journey we had as dad and daughter. What wonderful memories we'll have forever, thankfully.
And what do you think it is that's made that relationship with your dad and him being your coach work so well?
Do you know, it's difficult because there's so many boxers, predominantly males, with their fathers. It just doesn't work at all. Really doesn't. But for us, it did. I mean, we've always had a really, really close relationship anyway, even though, I mean, they were divorced before I was one because my dad got a really serious eye injury which stopped his career right in its tracks when it just turned professional. And I was born round about that time. And I was actually born in London for that reason because he went there to be a pro. So by the time they got back, I think it had just, destroyed their marriage. They were both really young and couldn't cope with that kind of thing. So I only saw him at weekend, but he still had an enormous influence on my life. And he never stopped. He made sure he came to see me every single weekend and, never let me down. And he was a fantastic dad. So we had a really close relationship. So I think that helped. But I respected him as a coach. We have got a very similar style. I like his coaching style. I like his boxing style. And it just really, really worked for us. And we saw every minute in the gym together as an absolute privilege that we never thought we'd have because it wasn't legal when I was a kid, obviously. We got to travel around together. We got to win the national title together, which was a really special one because we were the first father and daughter to both win a senior ABA national title. So that was a really special moment for us. I guess the answer to your question is that we're at heart, we're friends. We're very, very close friends. So I think that's where it worked, and I trusted him. I absolutely trusted him, which in any sport's important, but in boxing is very, very important. And I really trusted him. So he was my coach throughout my whole amateur career, other than when I was with, obviously, the national team.
And how did that feel, your first amateur fight, having waited, 2 decades and been told it wasn't legal? How did that finally feel?
Oh, wow. It felt great until about 2 weeks before it, and then the nerves kicked in. And it was horrendous. I'd never known nerves like it. Oh, my goodness me. It was awful. It was like electricity going through every vein in my body. That's the only way I can describe it. The nerves were unbelievable.
And the fear of what? The fear of, clearly the fear of getting punched in the face, but the fear of, what was it? The fear
no,
of,
not really. No, that bit doesn't, no, it's not really that. I think it's just your natural instinct, your natural adrenaline. It's obviously your brain's job to protect you from danger, whatever that danger might be. I mean, people can get just as nervous. I mean, I do a lot of public speaking, and people describe to me how they felt when they've had to do public speaking, and it's no different to when I've boxed. So it's not the physical fear. I think it's the fear that you could get humiliated, that you could lose, that you could not be as good as you want to be, that there's loads of things, I guess, that you fear, and it's your brain's job to say, right, there's a risk ahead, there's a don't do it. And it's odd because I'd never come across that before. I'd never had that in football.
No, okay.
No, only for penalties, but you have it for about 5 seconds as you make the walk up so it's not weeks in advance. With football, all I wanted to do was play, and I couldn't wait for the game. Whereas with boxing, for the first few fights, I'd be really looking forward to it, and it'd come to the week of the fight and then I didn't want to do it. But I knew I did, if that makes sense. But of course, I learned that was my brain's way of trying to protect me, and I had to override that and say, I know you're doing your job, but you're not really helping me right now. I've got this job to go and do. This is what I've trained for. It's who I want to be. I asked for this personal challenge. And I guess it's like anyone, people who endeavour to do these huge cycling across Europe or whatever it might be, when they reach those real challenges, when they're exhausted, they're aching, they're sore, that's when they have to say the same thing to themselves. You asked for this challenge. You've got to find a way through it. But the nerves were incredible. Funnily enough, on the day I woke up, I just switched in my mind and I said, right, you have waited all your life to do this. Are you actually going to let it pass you by in a flurry of nerves and not even remember it? Embrace it, get on with it. This is what you wanted. So get out there and get it done. And I did. It was still horrible. Like and I did the first round and I got back to the corner. I was like, Dad, oh my God. And he's like, I know, you'll be fine. You're going to get through it. And it was only 3 2-minute rounds, but it was the longest 6 minutes of my entire life. It was, but yeah, just a great feeling. Helped that I won. I think, it spurred me on a bit, obviously. And that was it then. I went from there. And it was just great to have my dad, and my granddad was in my corner as well.
And why did you choose to become professional?
So that came about because in 2014, I went to the European Championships and I won a silver medal there. For a start, to be there with that medal around my neck, watching my country's flag be raised, having been banned from the sport as a kid, was just unbelievable. Then to find out that I wouldn't be able to go to even try and qualify for the Olympics, that I couldn't go to the Commonwealth Games or the European Games because they didn't have equal weight categories for women, was devastating, really devastating. To not even have the chance to go to those prestigious tournaments. And that's just because of gender, and that's not right. So I kind of set my sights on the next World Championships and Europeans, which are every 2 years for women, every year for men. And so by the time that came around, I'd spent the whole 2 years just building up to that. So I'd had a brilliant 2015, won the national title, the multi-nations tournament, everything. And I was 3 months out from the Europeans and I had a routine knee injury, like a meniscus tear. So it should be 4 to 6 weeks after surgery. So I expected to still be back. It was going to be tight, but I knew I could do it to get back for the Europeans. And then, unfortunately, they made a mistake in the surgery and I woke up with a second-degree chemical burn all over one of my legs, which was just horrendous. And I knew straight away when I woke up because it was horrific pain. I don't know if you've had a burn, but it's awful. Not like any breaks or anything else I've had. And they kind of just said, it's just a graze, go home. And it just got worse and worse. It blistered, it got infected. I was rushed to hospital, had to go to the burns unit. So I was very, very quickly in quite serious trouble with the muscle, the leg. It was really bad. So it was actually about 6 months before I could do any training because of the risk of infection. I had to have dressings on it constantly. I couldn't walk. A few months after that, I started thinking, I don't think I'm going to be able to box again. I mean, I was 34 by then. And I thought, how am I going to get back from this? I just couldn't see it. As I started to think about coming back, I thought, I don't want to go for the Europeans and the Worlds again. It wasn't giving me that tingle that you need, that excitement. And I thought, the national championships, it's probably going to be the same people I boxed last time. But then when I started thinking about turning professional, it was that equal. Every morning when I woke up, half excitement, half fear. And that's what I need. I need that fear and excitement mix. And amateur boxing wasn't giving me that anymore, but pro was. And I thought, that's why I need to do it.
Yeah.
So again, as has often been the case, you don't know why these things are happening at the time. You just have to believe there'll be something positive at the end. And I think that ultimately was the positive outcome that I chose to turn pro.
And are you still boxing now and training now? You're still...
Yeah, I am. So
we're in lockdown, but...
Yeah, professional boxing, has been a definitely tough road, as it is for men and women. It's a very weird business. It's a very, very strange sport at the professional level. But I went to get my license, which is an interesting experience because you're generally in front of a panel of men who sent me every letter I got from the boxing board was addressed to Mr. Copeland. So when I went for the interview, they said, right, first of all, is there any questions? And I said, yeah, can you please address me as Miss? Because Mr. Copeland retired a very long time ago. And they're like, oh, right, we didn't realise. And then they asked the question at the end of it, and they said, so you're 34 years old. Why now? So I said, well, I can wait till I'm 35 if you want, but it seems a bit silly. I said, and do we really want to get into why I've not done this earlier? And nobody really said anything. I was like, right, well, that's why I've had to wait this long then. So if we could so that was that. And then we had all sorts of problems at the fights. Security guards not letting me up into the changing rooms, thinking I was just trying. And I was like, no, I'm a boxer. Oh, come on, love. I was like, no, I am a boxer. Then you'd have to warm up in the toilets because we've no changing room fee. You can't warm up with the men. It's not like everyone's walking around with no clothes on. You're just warming up like anybody else. Anyway, there were a few problems, but then we got to the point where there was talk of this Commonwealth title fight in Zimbabwe. So we arranged an 8-round fight before that so that I could get some, rounds in. And that fight cost a lot of money because, to get a fighter to come over for 8 rounds from a foreign country costs a lot. Got flights, hotel, their purse fee. So a lot of that was my own money. And on the night of the fight, 10 minutes before we were due to walk out, the whole show was cancelled because sadly there'd been a stabbing in the lobby, which was just horrendous. It should never happen at any event. And I thought, what's going on here? This is going to ruin everything. So that was another moment where everything seems to stop and you're like, no, this is not how it was meant to play. And then 3 days later, I got the phone call about Zimbabwe. So again, it went from a real low to just this huge high of getting this opportunity to go out there. And going to Zimbabwe was just up there with my pro debut, because my pro debut was so special because I never thought I'd get that moment. Like as a kid, like I say, I used to cut a slice of a cucumber and make my own little gum shield and be running around the house saying, I'm going to be a world champion, but it wasn't even legal for us to box then. And yet there I was making my actual professional debut. And the key to that was controlling the emotions, because all of my friends and family were there. It was in my home city of Manchester. Manchester bomb attack had been just 3 weeks before. And as part of my ring walk song, I have the Tony Walsh poem, This Is the Place. So it was just a hugely emotional occasion and something, a dream come true. I never thought would happen. But Zimbabwe was right up there with that, because, I mean, going to Zimbabwe was just phenomenal. I'd always wanted to go to Africa anyway. We visited loads of schools while we were there. It was just phenomenal. And on the night, it was without a doubt the toughest fight I'd ever had. I mean, she was a real unit. She really was a tough opponent. And of course we won, and it became the first British woman to win the Commonwealth title, which was, a lot of that's luck of the timing, but very grateful to have done it. And
it's so emotional. I've watched the video on here.
Yeah, it was a massive relief, I think, at the time. And I cried my eyes out. But it was a big thing there. There was over 100 million people watched it, 'cause it was on the free Kwese Sports. And no British person of any gender had boxed in Zimbabwe for 36 years before that. So it's a big thing. It was live streamed back home, so everyone watched it. And of course, the thing about that was that it was a massive high, but then I didn't get a belt, which was a huge low, I have to say.
Can you tell us about that? Sorry, just to explain why.
Yeah, of course, yeah. So I boxed on the Friday night. We got back Monday morning. I was back at work, because I was working at the school full time then. I rang the head of the Commonwealth Boxing Council when I got back from school that afternoon on the Monday, and I said, it was a fantastic experience. It was wonderful, but obviously I didn't get a belt. I want to know what's happened. So I actually knew on the Wednesday before the fight there wouldn't be a belt, and the promoters were trying to get one from somewhere. So we weren't sure up until the last minute if there'd be one or not. But I thought I've just got to get on with it and, win the title. And he said, I can explain what's happened. The manufacturers of the replica belt have ceased production. So I said, okay, what's that got to do with me? So he said, well, we have replica belts for women and real belts for men. Really matter of fact. So I said, wow, why is that? He said, well, there's more money in men's boxing. I said, I know, but surely if it meant not having the belt, I should have been given the option to have it, even if it meant buying it with my own money, because I'm never going to get that moment back. And I thought the worst moment would be straight after in the ring, because not having that belt for me and my coach to having that moment is like
that image of you holding the belt.
Yeah, that's the whole point. We're never going to have those memories now in that moment. And I thought that'd be the worst thing, but it wasn't. It was actually coming home, because everyone was so excited to see this belt. And I just didn't have the heart to tell them that there wasn't a belt, because I didn't want to put a dampener on things. But they'd all come to surprise me and my coach at the airport. And it was absolutely horrible to get there and not have that belt to share with them. It was really, really horrible. One, because I just wanted to share it with them. But two, because I knew that was just because of my gender. That wouldn't have happened to a male competitor. And it just felt so unfair again, that why should you have to feel like that, not as good as the other, the inferior, that, you know what I mean, again and again. So I explained this to him, and I said, right, nothing we can do about that now. How quickly can I have a real belt? So he said, well, you can have one in a couple of weeks, but they're quite expensive. So unless you've got a sugar daddy, you probably won't be able to have one. And I said, I beg your pardon? And he said, well, someone to buy it for you. I said, yes, I know what it means, but why on earth have you said that to me? Well, I didn't mean it in that way. I said, well, what way did you mean it? I said, I've worked throughout my entire sports career. I've had to, and I'm proud to have done so. I've done jobs that I believe have meaning and make a difference in the world. And I'm proud to have done that. What, fancy saying that to me? I can't believe it. I'm a professional athlete who's just been to make history. And I don't, and this kind of bit of the conversation was a bit kind of awkward and whatever. And I said, right, look, it's been said now. I said, but this can never happen to a future female champion. We need to do something to make sure there's a belt in the future. So fair play. They agreed to make a women's Commonwealth title belt, which I got in the December. They got the first ever one in December 2018, and now it's available. And I am very impatient for change, as I know you are, and every single person who comes on this podcast, that's precisely why we're here. We're trying to change things. So we're impatient for that. However, I do recognise we do have to allow space for that change to happen. I've changed in a lot of things that I think over the years about women too. You know, we're not exempt and immune to it. We're women who are brought up being taught women are not as good as, and you believe that. I believed that until I challenged it and became more aware, and I was like, no, this is just something. Women are fantastic at running and law and tech and everything else, as well as just sport. I had to learn that as well, and that's why I want to share it, particularly with young people.
And are things changing in boxing to make it fair for women in terms of categories and opportunities and things? Is it moving fast enough for you?
It's not moving fast enough for me, but things are changing. And I know that with boxing in particular, it's a sport that some people don't like, full stop. They don't like anyone doing it. So that's an extra layer of difficulty, obviously, because some people don't like men or women doing it. And I understand that. I totally appreciate why people don't like watching it, don't like seeing it. Totally understand that. As for women doing it, in terms of sport, it challenges society's definition of femininity almost more than any other sport does.
Yeah.
So it's particularly a difficult one to move people's perceptions on. However, what we do know about sport, in whatever form, whatever type of sport it is that if we see women excelling and women portrayed in a positive light and being positive role models, it affects every other aspect of society. I know that to be true, and boxing needn't be any different. And actually, if the argument is about the physical aspect of it, we're actually far less powerful naturally, because women are trained women, that is, and trained men, not every woman and every man. If a man doesn't train, they seem to think in some cases they'd be beating Serena Williams at tennis and stuff, and you're like, right, okay. But yeah, that's where they get a bit confused. But you know, physically we're not as damaging as men are in the sport anyway. It tends to be more technical than the men's game. So yeah, it is definitely getting better, but for me it's part of the bigger discussion that, you know, on the inspiration days that we've had for Pave the Way, we've had female pilots that have come in and told us, when they've done the announcement at the beginning, people have refused to fly with them and said, I cannot be flown by a woman. And that's how ingrained it in us that we're incapable of certain things. It's amazing. And that's something we all need to work hard to change.
Can you tell us a little bit about Pave the Way? So we've led into that.
Absolutely, yeah. So Pave the Way, when I turned professional, I didn't have a natural boxing nickname, let's say, because they tend to be like, you know, the Hitman, the Assassin, the Cobra, whatever. And my nickname is SpongeBob SquarePants. And this is because every time I've been injured and put weight on, I turn into a square-shaped human being. I literally am square when I put weight on. So my friends lovingly call me SpongeBob. And so that wasn't a great nickname for a boxer. So I decided to go with something that I stood for and meant something to me, which was Pave the Way, which was predominantly at the beginning about paving the way for other girls and women in my sport and in other sports. So after my debut, it was Women's Sport Week, which, remember, that was the thing they used to do for 1 week of the year when everyone used to shout about women's sport and then forget it for the other 51 weeks. It was actually the last Women's Sport Week that they did. And I'd done loads of other people's projects for it. I wanted to do my own. So we made Pave the Way a 1 week project where I visited loads of schools, community groups. We did a photography exhibition of women who work in sport, because I think athletes are a lot more visible now, but women who work in sport, you never hear of them. People don't know, you know, and I wanted young girls to know, if you've got a love for sport, but maybe you're not competitive or it's not a sport that can be a livelihood, any skill or interest you've got can apply. It can be a career in sport. So that's now on permanent display at the National Cycling Centre. And that was it, really. We just did it for a week. And then suddenly this hashtag seemed to catch on and people were saying, Pave the Way, or my daughter and son's done this, Pave the Way. And I thought, maybe we need to do a bit more with it. So I had it on my kit anyway. And it's changed in two ways over the last 3 years. One is that through all of the public speaking I've done, it's become quite apparent to me that my experience in sport is not exclusive to women in sport. It's women in law, women in tech, women in construction, aviation, you name it, who come to me after these talks and say, that is exactly my story. So I thought, right, it ought not just to be about sport, then it needs to be about other industries. And then as time's gone on, I've had loads of parents contact me who've got sons who do things like, you know, singing or ballet or whatever, and they've been picked on that much because it challenges masculinity, that they've actually given up. I think that's just dreadful. That for me, that moment when I was asked to leave the pitch could have been the moment I said, right, this isn't for me. And imagine my life without sport. You know, I wouldn't have gone to America or Sweden or Brazil to play. You take away sport from my life, it's unthinkable. So the fact that these passions are being taken away from these children at an early age, it's not good enough. And I can't settle with that. So Pave the Way has become about more than sport, all industries and aspects of life, really, and about both genders. Because really, gender isn't the problem, is it? It's the masculinity and femininity things that we put alongside gender that's the problem. And it's as much a stigma for boys as girls in some cases. So, yeah, we've applied for charity status 9 months ago and we just got it 6 weeks ago, which was a massive,
congratulations.
Massive milestone for us. So, yeah, we getting to work now with... it's not the ideal time to start anything, really, a pandemic. But, you know, that's good things come out of a crisis sometimes, and that's the way we're looking at it.
I'm talking about, I guess, gender and perception. I know as a straight woman, you've been an amazing advocate for the LGBT community and causes. And does it still concern you that people assume that you're a lesbian because you box, you play football, etc.?
It concerns me because when I was younger, I didn't understand much about sexuality when I was a teenager. I wasn't even thinking about it. I just wanted to play football and box and just be a kid. And when these things started to come up, particularly from adults, because it was, like I say, predominantly it was from the adults rather than the kids, it was confusing to me. And I thought, well, the kids are saying, do I want to be a boy? What am I? Like, is it me that doesn't, I just thought I was happy being a girl playing these sports. And I thought, well, am I something that I don't think I am? Do I want to be a boy? It was really, really confusing because these are messages I was getting all the time. So it doesn't bother me now, personally, but it annoys me because I remember that young girl that I was.
Absolutely.
And all of those other young girls are facing that, as do boys. They get questioned about their sexuality if they're doing something that questions masculinity. And it can be really confusing as a youngster. For example, I remember sexuality wasn't discussed in the under-14s team. Kids weren't even aware of it. I work in a school 1 day a week now, and they know about transgender, they know about gender fluid. They're really informed. Back then we weren't. But when I went into the first team, there was loads of openly gay women. And I was like, right. People are calling me names and saying I'm like them. So is there something wrong with them, or is there something wrong with me? And there was all this stuff to work out. Hopefully kids now don't have that because we're so much more informed about the LGBT community, which is fantastic. And that's why it annoys me, because the stigma that goes with these things, which there shouldn't be anyway, obviously, but we still have a stigma with it, and it can be an extra layer of confusion for young people. And that was exactly the same experience for my friends who were gay. I wasn't, as it happens, but they were trying to figure things out at the time as well. And, am I gay? Am I not? What's all that? They were going through that and getting the same messages that, one, it wasn't okay to be gay, and two, if you're a woman in sport, what does that mean? It just confuses the whole thing.
Yeah.
And it's happened since. I got a phone call just last year. I was sat on a train with my mum going to London, and I got a phone call from somebody saying, can you speak at this event? Really, really lovely woman, and no ill intent meant by it. But we had this whole conversation about sport and women and gender. And then he said, right, can you come and speak at this event? So I said, yeah, I'll happily speak. And he said, I think it'll be great because, as a female athlete who's out and proud, it'll be great to have you. And I said, oh, wait a minute, I'm not out and proud. You're not proud? I said, no, I'm not proud. I'm just not gay. I said, I'll happily come and speak as an advocate because that's really important. And I can't speak authentically as a gay person because I'm not, but I'll happily be an advocate. She was like, oh, and she went really quiet. And then she said, well, lots of people think you're gay. And I said, oh, do they? I said, well, my boyfriend doesn't, who I happen to have a great relationship with. And it's bizarre.
I was going to ask you, I know you spoke out very boldly and very articulately around the whole demise of Good Girls, Walk On Girls, etc., which is, 18 months ago now. And I think I can remember driving back. I was driving back from an event and pulling the car over to listen to your hour on Radio 5. You were just so calm and articulate about it. So why did you feel at the time so strongly that you wanted to stand up and voice your opinions in that space?
Well, I felt strongly about Ring Car Girls from the beginning because the only time I saw women in my sport was dressed in very, sexual outfits with a piece of cardboard with a number on it, walking around the ring. And that bothered me because, it took us so long to get the right to box. And I know as a female boxer, I'm not as accepted as the males, despite doing all the same training as them, dedicating my life to it, yet somebody who's there for sexual appeal is. And there's something wrong with that picture for me. Plus, from going to a lot of boxing events, in an age where we're trying to teach boys about respect for women, consent, all of that, rightly so, to then take them to what is a sports event, not a lap dancing club, not a gentleman's club, but a sports event where people are shouting extremely sexualised, crude, and in my opinion, quite vile things. And it's totally socially acceptable. And really, those boys are watching those male role models act like that in a sports environment. And to me, that's not what sport is at all. And so I was never a fan of it. So I've never had ring card girls from the start of my career. I had kids who were into boxing, mascots, just like we have at Wimbledon, just like we have at football. And I think if at Wimbledon we suddenly changed that and had court girls or net girls or whatever we'd call them, we'd be saying, oh, what's going on? What's going on? If we had it at the Olympics or in football, we'd say, oh, just because it's always been that way in my sport doesn't mean it's right. And it's exactly that question it, challenge it, change it thing, my approach with Pave the Way. Quite often, if you don't question things, they stay the same and they need to change. When all this came out about grid girls, it was all over the internet and somebody tagged me in it and said, it's the same in boxing, but Stacey Copeland doesn't have ring card girls, she has kids as mascots, and put a picture on of me with some of the mascots. And then the BBC contacted me and said, would you be prepared to come on and have a discussion about it tomorrow? I thought about it, I said, right, I'll do it. And that morning, I felt as sick as I do having a fight because I knew there'd probably be a massive backlash. And there was, but it was worth it because I believe that I'm on the right side of history with this. And my hope is that when Ruby is older, she's already seeing images of, the only women she sees at the Tour de France are stood either side of the male, giving him a peck of the cheek. There's one on each side giving him a peck on the cheek and they hold that one leg up at the back and stand like this. And that's the only representation she's got of women at the Tour de France because we're still not able to do the Tour de France as women. In darts, in boxing, in all of these sports, she's only seeing women in that role. And I want her to grow up not seeing that. And I want her to look back on these things and say, Auntie Stacey, did there used to be women who used to walk around a boxing ring in a bikini with a cardboard and number on? And I can go, yes, isn't that odd? That's the conversation I want. I don't want it to be, yeah, we're still trying to get rid of it. So I went on BBC Breakfast. The backlash was, there was loads of positive, I have to say, but there was a lot of negatives. And there were those sad things that people say. I got called dyke more times than I care to remember, jealous of attractive women. And this is the interesting thing. I wasn't putting myself up there saying, who doesn't want to see this? You know what I mean? I was not saying give me marks out of 10 for how I look. Yeah, that's what it became, me versus them in attractiveness, right, fine. Then I got the usual, women's sports, rubbish anyway, the whole array, a spectrum of nastiness, which if you're not used to it is quite hard. For about 48 hours, it is like, I can see why it affects people's mental health so severely because the onslaught of it was it is like a tsunami coming over you constantly, and it's people who don't even know you, and you do have to talk to the people you trust and know who can put it back into perspective. I won't name who just in case they don't want me to, but someone from the Women's Sport Trust messaged me on Twitter and said, you're doing great, keep going, don't let it bother you, don't. And that one message gave me such a lift I can't begin to tell you, because fantastic. I was like, sometimes you do need your people, so to speak, who are on the same page, you just to remind you, we agree, we're with you. It really, really helped. And that's really important, though, to know that, isn't it, for other people, but for other people to know, to make that effort to reach out, to just reassure when people are in that. It was huge, and especially when it's people on the Women's Sports Trust, because all of you who are trustees or involved in any way are people we all look up to. Yeah. That was all I needed to give me the strength to face 1,000 bad comments. Look back on that positive change that impacted. I've got a couple more questions, if that's okay. Some major at the moment, obviously speculating that COVID-19 pandemic could have a huge negative impact on women's sport and all the progress we've made. Wes, what do you say to that? Not if we've got anything to do with it, Sue, all of us. Yeah, I think I'm really getting annoyed with this, to be honest. And we've been talking about this with the Unlocked group, because obviously the Unlocked campaign is a lot of very passionate athletes and activators. And we're looking at, what we can do at the minute, because, and this is the weird thing sometimes about singling things out by gender alone. We know there's loads of men's non-league teams and league teams in every level of football who are really under threat. Loads of them went under way before COVID-19 happened. Yet we don't say, men's football's at risk. What we mean is some of men's football. if we look at women's sport, who and what are they talking about? I think Serena Williams will be all right after all this. Do you know what I mean? She won't be struggling. So who are you talking about? Like, be more specific than the whole of women's sport. That's what's annoying when you're lumped into this whole thing. And I think, like with anything, if you say it over and over and over again, it becomes almost a fact. That's part of the problem with social media, isn't it? That when it comes to really important stuff, people can just say things again and again and people believe it. Why does women's sport need to disappear? Why are we not talking about this being an opportunity for women's sport? If we're not fully relying now on gate tickets, because that's a fair argument about equal pay. If it's on the Olympic funded programme, that should absolutely be the same for male and female athletes. No question about it. But for things that's off revenue, merchandise, ticket sales, whatever, there is going to be a difference, because you can't compare 80,000 men's gate fees to the 2,000 or 3,000 might be at women's. That makes sense. Now that's not an issue. Well, what a great opportunity for us. You know, we've got the BBC, 52% of their licence payers are women. Why not serve that community then? While it's not costing you loads to get women's sport on board, what's stopping you? What we're waiting for here? Let's be promoting and sharing. You see, it doesn't make sense to me why the channels aren't just full of women's sport at the moment. While they've got all this footage that costs next to nothing to broadcast, let's get it all on. Why are we not doing that? Why are we not seizing this moment and thinking, right, there's a crisis, but we know great things can come from a crisis, so let's seize the moment and make something great happen. If them people in 1972 would have said, we're never going to get this Title IX passed, it's too hard, it's too difficult, I would never have got the opportunities that I had, neither would thousands of other women. And that's why I know right now, the likes of you and I and everyone who's got some platform, and they're all different roles that we've got, but we've all got to do something to make sure we don't, let this tide overwhelm us, and we say, no, that next generation is depending on us to make sure. And even if you can't do it for yourself, you've got to find it within you to find a way for that, that next lot of young hopefuls coming through, who for them sport is going to be an amazing thing in their life, just as it's been for us.
Stacey, with you on board, I think we're going to be okay. I'm reassured.
I hope so.
My final question, if I can, as you've mentioned, you've visited hundreds of schools, both through Pave the Way and the work that you've done. So when you're out there talking to young people, if you had to just surmise, what are a couple of the core messages you want to get across to them when you're talking?
Obviously, the general stuff like about sport in general, what it can do for you, what a fantastic thing it is in your life, as with any passion. But predominantly it's around my lived experience, which is gender. And my whole belief for Pave the Way is that gender should never be a barrier to human potential. So I tell kids there shouldn't be stuff for boys and stuff for girls. If you're good at something, if you love it, if you're passionate about it, you should be able to pursue it with your whole self. And that's the key message I try and get across. And I ask an interesting question I've started asking when I go into schools, if they've heard of the word tomboy. I'll say, I've represented my country in 2 sports. Quite often people describe me with this one word. And I put the word up and I say, who's heard of this word? And you know what's really interesting? They're always seated from reception to the back. So the little ones are at the front, and then you get year 1, year 2, and they get bigger and bigger as they go to the back. Everybody at the back puts their hand up. And as you get closer to the front, there's fewer and fewer, which tells us a couple of things. One, it's a word that we acquire as we get older that isn't necessary for little kids. And it tells me there's a way of culturally phasing that word out, because they learn it somewhere from reception to year 6. But it shows that there must be a way that we can get rid of that word, and that girls will just do what they do and boys will do what they do. So that's the message that I try and get through to schools. And ultimately, one of the things that really helps me is that I'm very, very strong and passionate about my why. And this gets used a lot, doesn't it, on memes and Instagram and whatever. And if you're just doing it to try and build a brand, doesn't have the same impact. But if it really is in your heart and soul, like it is for me, it makes a difference in everything that you do. And for me, the key things, obviously there's a personal things like personal challenge, reaching my potential in sport. But beyond that, it's influencing change. So getting that message out to as many young people as possible, being the role model that I never had growing up is enormously important, and making a positive difference. And I'm blessed to have a love for sport, which is one of the most powerful things on earth for making a difference. And I'll absolutely use it in every way that I can to make a positive difference wherever that may be. A bit like we have that carbon footprint, I think we have a human footprint too of the impact we've had on others. And I want mine to have been a positive human footprint, and ultimately be able to go back to that little girl that I was and tell her, eventually you will be proud of who you become, because I wasn't back then. I didn't know how to feel proud of who I was because of the messages that I was getting. And I want her to know you will be someone you can be proud of. And I want her to know I've done everything I can to make things better. And ultimately, everything that I say and do in primary schools and everywhere else is because of that why, to try and make things better going forward.
Thanks so much to Stacey for sharing her powerful story with me. I look forward to following her progress as she paves the way for young people in the future. If you're enjoying the Game Changers, then please do tell your friends and family about the podcast. If you could share details on social media and take a moment to rate and review the podcast wherever you listen, that would be fantastic. Thanks again to the team at Barclays for so kindly supporting the Game Changers. You can find out more about all the guests from this and previous series at fearlesswomen.co.uk. And thanks also to my rather wonderful executive producer for the series, Sam Walker at What Goes On Media. Next week, I'm talking to the football powerhouse that is Ebru Koksal. Following a career in New York as a financial analyst at Morgan Stanley, Ebru became CEO at Galatasaray. She was the first woman to be elected to the executive board of the European Club Association and became the first and only female General Secretary of the Turkish Football Federation. Ebru is now chair of Women in Football. It's a fascinating conversation about gender equality and leadership at the highest levels of football.
Then I started thinking, oh my God, I have been subject to so many discriminations and sexism and difficulties, and I didn't complain about it at all because I was just happy to be there, to be advancing, to be part of this really dynamic environment.
The Game Changers. Fearless Women in Sport.